So first question, I think might have already been answered from Niall. Can we build models in different codes, i.e. R and Python, and make seamless workflows? And I know Brian kind of responded to this in the chat. So Niall, I wonder if you've heard from Tom now and that has actually met that requirement.
Yeah, as I mentioned as I went through, perfectly possible to do that, yeah. The only thing we're having troubles with are like licensed software. So we've had a few problems with MATLAB models, but we have got one of those containerized and working now. So if you're like based on R or Python or Java or C or C++, whatever, it's fine as long as it's Dockerized.
Yeah, I mean, I would add there is, there's a bit of overhead you have to with Docker, and that is not necessarily something that people are familiar with. So there's a bit of an overhead there. However, we would compare, learning and building Docker models with having to modify your code to accommodate working with other people's data and other people's models. So we think that the advantages of the little bit of pain of learning of doing Dockerizing, outweighed by the advantages of being able to work with the components on the system.
Maybe just to add to that, but also, as I noted, there's very good instructions actually, which are laid out with some work examples to show how to get over that hump with with DAFNI as well. Tom is just mentioning Beth and the sort of the GIS, which is quite a strong area. Is sort of on the horizon as well as one of the visualizations.
Yes, so we're currently improving the visualization component of DAFNI sort of across the platform, and the ability to make maps using drag and drop facilities will be a part of that. So if you upload GIS-based data sets or your model outputs GIS-based data sets, then there will be a nice facility available to you to fairly easily view those on the platform.
Niall, has that answered your question, if it's still about?
It does, I think so. I do have another question that sort of follows on from that, if I can ask.
Yeah, fire away. Just a quick question. Whereabouts are you based in Cranfield?
I'm in water in Swee, and I'm looking at soil samples with infrared spectrometers.
Fantastic. Just what we want. Okay, so yeah, fire away with the other question.
Yeah, it's with the models, I'm a little bit new to coding and modeling, so forgive me if I use the wrong terms, but am I right in thinking you can only put in models that have sort of already been compiled? You couldn't like develop a model using machine learning within the platform?
Good question, because we had one of the areas we were helping out with earlier in the year was some machine learning that was taking a long time to run at Cranfield. So over to the techie team. Are you able to help Niall with this sort of area?
Yeah, I mean, machine learning is not really my area of expertise, but as far as I understand it, you have to train a machine learning model and then you can give it some level of input and then it will give an output based on how it's been trained to respond. We don't necessarily support the training of models at the moment on DAFNI, so you're right in saying that you do need something that takes an input and produces an output. We couldn't have something that runs for a long period of time training itself. It could be something that we look into in the future, but not something that we've necessarily talked about just yet. And there is pre-existing expertise within the department that we sit in within STFC, as well as a whole department, whole group based around machine learning. So we definitely make use of their expertise on that. I don't know if Brian has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry. I froze for a minute there, so I actually missed your question. But I kind of guess what we're saying. Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely right. It's the moment we're not. We would use a machine learning trained model as an output. Sorry, if that was what your output of your research, and then we could use that as part of our research. It's the moment we're not tailored to support sort of the training of models specifically. I could envisage that we would support that, and in fact, I could envisage ways that we could do that in the future. It would, you know, with some of the some of the underpinning sort of cloud and Kubernetes components we're looking at the moment. Yeah, not at the moment. It's kind of on the roadmap rather than it's something we'll be thinking about something for the future rather than providing support for it right now.
So as I say, Niall, we had a couple of researchers at Cranfield earlier in the summer who they had some issues with needing to quickly do some machine learning, and there was an initial conversation with Tom and Brian and everybody at STFC. So if you've got some questions, might be worth us having a chat and then maybe getting a conversation going if needed, if that would be helpful. Okay, yeah, brilliant. Okay, a man of few words he's on prefers the chat. That's good. Yeah.
So there was a question from Andrew Starr. I have a requirement for mobile equipment which may not always have comms and location info everywhere. Is there already a strategy for this? And I know there was quite a lot of chat around this. Do we want to pick this up here, or has it been answered in the chat?
I commented on the chat. So this is an issue, Andrew, that we're dealing with the urban observatories. So some of our sensors are on a fixed network. Some of them are deployed in the middle of nowhere and use Vodafone IoT network, which I can tell you a little bit more about if that's of interest. There's also conversations ongoing and with Bethan and others around the ability to stream data from the field straight into DAFNI via, it could be MQTT or straight into a database. So that's something that's being worked on with the urban observatories. So that might be of help. And I suspect this is an area where we're going to do some future tests. So some of the other urban observatories, they have LoRaWAN networks, etc. So that's an area of interest. Also, it links in with Steve and I have an interest in, we keep trying to get funding for a kind of a mobile emergency data kind of collection van thing. So we can deploy in the field. If that's an area of interest, do let us know, because we keep trying to build the business case for it and not succeeding.
It's of great interest, and it's I think got potential in a number of different application areas. The particular issue is railway inspection, and you would kind of think that connectivity and GPS and so on was universal. But of course, you only need to get a Faraday cage or a tunnel or even a built-up area. We actually tried a device at Cranfield and found that the tall buildings around buildings 83 and 52 were actually big enough to stop access to the enough sky for satellites, for example. So we can be pretty confident that there are places on the railway network that autonomous devices will have to be completely autonomous because they won't be able to communicate with cloud. And at that point, they will need enough onboard architecture for mapping and data collection. And then they'll have to stream all that when they do get back into contact with civilization, as it were. So obviously one can invent something for this, and it's been done before in areas like Mars rovers and oil drilling and so on. But I kind of think there must be some good things to click into here.
Maybe, Andrew, just following that up, sort of question for Bethan and Tom is, where does it sit in terms of sort of API access to results that sit within, I feel like we think about sort of input and output, so we might need an API access to put data in, and that's what we're discussing here, and whether it's a constant stream or whether your app sort of suddenly comes alive, as you say, Andrew, when it sees the network and you know, sends all the data in. But getting data out as well? What mechanisms might there be for API access to result or data that sits within?
Interesting question. I would say that at the moment, DAFNI lies behind a login. So you would need to have login access. So we're not totally open in that way. And at the moment, we do have internal APIs that we use as part of the system. So with the right credentials, it's conceivably possible that you could use that as a user. It's not something we really support and at the moment, and the APIs aren't necessarily what's the word? Fixed, essentially. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yet they're still evolving as we develop the system. At the moment, those APIs, as I mentioned, all our data is held in object storage. So we are serving static data at the moment. But with the Urban Observatory's work that we're looking at now, we're prototyping bringing in dynamic data. So, you know, querying every minute or 15 minutes, as Simon said. And I think it's probably, yeah, it's fairly conceivable that we could use similar systems in order to get then data off the platform later on. So extending those APIs that we currently have for the static data sets and yeah, building on them to take data off the platform. Certainly something interesting to look at. Yeah,
it's certainly something we'd be interested in, Andrew, because for example, some of our water quality levels sensors, they're powered by solar, and they only fire, they communicate via 4G, and due to power requirements, they only fire up once a day and send the data over. Then there's all sorts of other technologies out there. Just going back to the mobile connectivity, I took a slide out of my slide pack. So the Sheffield Urban Observatory, they've invested in a number of mobile sensing vehicles. So one does air quality. Mm-hmm. One is a 3D scanner. So it's a bit like a Google Street View vehicle on steroids. So it's got LiDARs, infrared, etc. And it's also got, I'm not sure whether it's in that van or another one, they've got RF spectrum analyzers. So the idea is that they're scanning Sheffield to build a digital twin of Sheffield. And one of the things they're also interested in is this exact issue of building design and structure and how it affects RF propagation. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is that facility, all the UCRIC facilities are shared. So if we wanted to scan and develop a 3D model of Cranfield, and it included the RF side of things, and this is something we're a little bit interested in relation to our systems as well and security aspects, that is possible. So maybe there's a conversation to be had. I see Andrew's about to share his screen. He's got, yes. So you've got your rover. The other aspect of this, Andrew, just very quickly, we would like to be able to put sensors on a rover like that and take that rover autonomously into areas that are maybe a little bit dangerous. So, for example, around an aircraft on an airfield. So a conversation, it sounds like a conversation is needed.
Absolutely. I thought you might like to see the picture. This is about 10 days ago. We got we built the trolley last summer, and it's had various things tacked onto it, but getting it loaded is quite a pivotal thing. And we expect to get 20 meters of track delivered, hopefully this week or next, if only facilities will get off the pot. You know, there's so much red tape, but basically for this thing to trundle up and down the track. However, you can see that the key thing is it's got rubber tires, and it's intended for wading, battlefield work, infrastructure inspection, and on top of it, it's got LiDAR, GPS, 2 cameras, universal robot for various actuation and what have you. So that's a Cranfield long term. It belongs to Network Rail.
Yeah, so This comes back to some of the thinking that Steve and I and others had early on in this project, is that ability. You could be collecting data, say, on the movie road with a vehicle, with the LiDARs, etc. Could you beam that data into DAFNI or another system? So our data portal is a cloud-based system. Could you do processing on it in that compute? And could you then fire it back to, say, a user at Cranfield with a tablet? So in the long term, we'd like to do that sort of work, and that starts to bring in things like 5G and things we're having conversations about on campus. So yeah, sounds like a conversation is
absolutely. But what disturbed me was the kind of direction of flow about 5G, for example, suggests that it'll be everywhere, you can do everything, and we immediately thought, oh no, you can't, because you know, you only have to get to a remote bit of Wales, and you still got to be autonomous. You still got to have a good map. You still got to get good measurements on to things related to that map, and you'll be lucky if there's any mobile phone connection.
Yeah, so it sounds like you need to chat with some of the DARTEC team and who they're working with. Okay, fantastic. So there's a link. Marion, next question.
So we had Niall asking if DAFNI was only for UCRIC facilities. Brian, would you like to answer that?
Well, in principle, no. At the moment, as I said, we're kind of very much a pilot phase. We have a executive board who are all UCRIC partners, and they kind of oversee who we're giving access to. But in theory, no, not necessarily. You know, we're looking at projects with other universities. I mentioned the OpenClim project. That's with the University of East Anglia. That's who are not involved, as far as I know. Well, certainly not that group involved with UCRIC. And so in the future, no, we'd see it as a sort of a central facility or a common facility that's supporting all work in the infrastructure engineering and systems sort of analysis sector. As I said, any relevant topic. It doesn't, not restricted to particular institutions. That's what we certainly would hope.
Thanks, Brian. And Steve, this is one to put you on the spot. Have you considered using a common domainless upper ontology, see BFO, GIST, DO, I won't spell them all out, but they're on the chat, to define the architecture of a digital twin? Am I unfair putting you on the spot with that one?
That's a nasty one just before lunch.
I'm not actually aware of that. We've been drawing together a list of all of the ontologies that we've found. I need to go and check if that's one of the ones sorry, who's asked that one? Is that
David? He's waving at you on the screen.
Oh, hello, David.
Where are you based, David?
At Cranfield, in the Center of Digital Engineering and Manufacturing.
Fantastic.
There's a sort of a bit of a similar question there from Michael about BIM and holding information there. I think this is still early days. I don't think we've particularly highlighted any. We're not being prescriptive about which ontologies we are selecting. We've looked at some case studies, one of which is traffic analysis, another of which was roadway condition. And some of the engineering firms who've been kindly contributing to this have been sort of feeding into that process. And there's a report which we are producing, which is going to list all of these the ontologies we found and the different levels of those. So perhaps, David, I'll share that with you when we've got that published very shortly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Sean has raised a question about security, because the data could be used against the national interest by hostile nation states. So how is security being addressed on DAFNI?
So I hope I belayed some of these allayed some of these fears in the demo. So as I said, when you upload your data, that's done privately to you. So unless you choose to provide access to that data to other people, then it's not available to them. That said, it depends on the security of your data. So as I showed you when I logged in with a super user account, we on the development team do have access to that data. So if it is critically sensitive that no one on the development team should see it either, then that would be a separate conversation. We don't support that level of security of the data at the moment.
There's possibly, I don't know whether Sean wants to comment on that, but this is an area where maybe there's a piece of a conversation to be had with the colleagues in CDS. So around the data, not only the data security aspect and what can or can't be done in certain fields on DAFNI, but also some of the security implications around things like digital twins and what could be done with those. So I know this is a very topical conversation at the issue at the moment from conversations that I've been having or have been involved with. Sean, have you got any comments on this? Because I think this is a really interesting topic and one for a deeper conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So one of the things we have been looking at over the past few years is assessing risks from terrorist attacks. And these are done mainly for the insurance industry, not for the government. So we have some models which are non-governmental models, which we can essentially use with the private sector and pseudo public sector as well. And obviously things we're after are things such as, so to be able to use those models effectively, we need geographic data, particularly in cities. So buildings and their heights are crucial things. So we can do analyses of things such as dispersal of noxious substances and also the effects of things like explosions in those cities. Now, unfortunately, because once you start to do that kind of thing, the information then does become sensitive, because it could, although it's not being done for the government or anything or the military, it does mean that if someone were to get hold of that data, it might point them to a better place to locate their device to maximize the outputs of a terrorist attack. So we'd really like to, we want to look at being able to get hold of geographic data, particularly for cities, to be able to run scenarios. And then, but ensure that the data was kept private between us and the person we'd be doing the work with. So I don't know if that, there are some other things we'd like to do as well, some more generic things which would be publishable and which wouldn't involve sensitive data. For example, what are the effects of changes in architecture style, high-rise buildings versus low-rise on damage following such incidents? Large panels of glazing, what impact does that have? So that needn't be for a particular scenario, but if we could kind of get something and use it, which was fairly realistic, that maybe desensitized in some way, that would be useful to us.
Sean, I think it would be really interesting to have a further chat with you about this, because we're also doing a lot of modelling with insurance sector on sort of city scale geographic data.
Yeah,
but probably slightly different applications. We're looking at geohazard modelling, but probably some of the same data and some of the same issues. I would very much suspect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I'm doing some of that as well. So maybe we should follow that up. That definitely could be the platform to do it on. but yeah, we have to address these. The Cranfield does have these applications that have security firmly in their centre of health.
Yeah, just very quickly, Sean. It'd be I think the three of us might want to have a conversation about one or two ideas and projects.
Yeah, cool.
And I think this issue isn't just an issue for the kind of the security work. I think this is going to be an issue when you bring in water utilities, etc., because we know the vulnerabilities and the and the kind of confidentiality aspects of the data that they hold, so they're already being targeted, actively targeted. So yeah, I think there's a conversation to be had here, and there's something quite interesting to be done. The other aspect, Sean, is the kind of starting to plumb in some of the real-time or near real-time data from the urban observatories, etc. And maybe a conversation around some of the ideas we have for the urban observatory and living lab. So let's have a conversation. This is turning into one of these calls where actually it's about we're linking up bits of Cranfield who don't talk. So this is the Cranfield way.
All the air quality monitoring.
Exactly, yes. So let's have a conversation. There's lots of things going on at the moment that are all starting to link up in this area.
Okay, and I'll touch base with some of my colleagues who work on the air related side of these things. Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
Yeah.
Maybe I can add. I mean, I think I'll add to what Bethan said. I mean, because we'll be really interested in that conversation as well. We are, we're in the machine room environment at RAL, which is well, I believe a well managed and sort of reputable data center. Nevertheless, we are essentially supporting the research community, and which means that we tend not to have the certifications of around which some of the sort of defence or even health or some commercial institutions might want. But we would want to have a conversation about how we would, what are the requirements and how we might nevertheless work in those situations, what we need to do. We've had a quite interesting conversation with the Office of National Statistics. We've got a bit quiet actually. We probably need to chase them down about accessing their sensitive data and how we might sort of collaborate on that. Not necessarily moving their data to us, but providing some kind of channel where certain aspects of the workflow can be done on their system or something like that, because they clearly have very sensitive data in Office of National Statistics. So I mean, yeah, I think it is something that we're very well aware of, and we do want to explore further. So yeah, very interested in continuing that conversation.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. We'll be in touch. Okay. Any other questions, Marion?
Now,
did you?
Emel has made a. Sorry, Emel, I'm going to put you on the spot now. You've made a nice comment here, not necessarily a question, but it would be great if the data page shows the number of variables and the number of observations and the definitions of the variables in the data set. So I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more behind that.
Oh, when I was looking at the screen, I was wondering what's in this data, and it would be not very useful if I had to spend a lot of time finding out what the data is about. And although we have some variable names, they are not always immediately clear what they are about. So this is a problem when you work with other people's data, that you can't really figure out how they coded it, whether one means absent or present. So that type of information I was looking to see on the data page.
Can I, if Bethan wants to comment, and I'm going to comment from the Urban Observatory's perspective, because we're doing a lot of work around this. So over to Bethan.
Okay, yeah, so thanks, Emel. We had a look at this quite early on. CSV files were an option for being able to do this computationally, but we hit some stumbling blocks already. If we have non-standard formatting on your CSV data, then it can be difficult to extract. If you've got a comment at the wrong place, for example, then it can be difficult to extract even column headings from CSV data. And as I said, at the moment users can upload any format of data. So it's not feasible for us to be computationally interrogating every single type of data file and extracting that information. And even then, what we could be extracting would be things like headings and metadata put on the file. We couldn't, grab semantic meaning from what those things are. So really, at the moment, it's on the user to improve the discoverability of their data, to put as much information as possible in the description, rather than just copy and paste the title, which is what I did. I think in time that is a direction that will move in, certainly for more bespoke data sets where we are manually uploading them. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add to that. I mean, there's a real trade-off here. I mean, that information is really interesting, really useful, but it's also quite hard work. And as Bethan mentioned, it's hard work to extract that computationally. In general, you may be able to do if you have a good, well-defined format, or you have a well-defined schema with your data, you may be able to pull it out. But otherwise, it's actually very hard to do in general. And to expect users to type in a load of fields saying these are the parameters of the data and these are the sort of conditions you're talking about is also very hard work on the user. And there is always a balance of putting metadata about what is meaningful metadata to have, and what is acceptable for someone who's uploading data to be bothered to do. And if we start asking for lots and lots and lots of fields, it may well be a real barrier to updating to uploading data. So yeah, I would really love to have it, and we'd like, as Bethan mentioned, it's exploring ways to make that better and more accessible, better notation, and providing sort of automatic ways in for particular cases. But nevertheless, it isn't that straight. It isn't straightforward to do, I'm trying to say.
And maybe just another follow-up from that. So as we've mentioned with Simon and the Urban Observatory data, there are a few curated data sets that we're bringing on specifically as part of the wider project activity. And for those, obviously, we as a team will spend more time, unpacking that for the user. But at this point, as Brian's saying, where people are uploading their own data in that kind of community sense, then what I would suggest actually is we do have contact details, mandatory contact details for anyone who uploaded the file. And I would suggest maybe dropping them an email and saying, could you add this information to your file, as a quick way of doing it. It'll slow things down a little bit, but that would be nice if we could build up that kind of community sense of people like really laying out what's in a data set for other users.
Well, I might just say from the research ontology project, it's obviously very hard to automate this process, but what I think is good about DAFNI is the way that the mechanisms are there for those who really want to share their data. There's a mechanism to add in DCAT2 metadata standards and the sort of taxonomies around that, and we're exploring, as Bethan said, different taxonomies to see which one fit the best. So if you're trying to find data on a particular theme or a particular topic, and coming back to those fair data principles, I mean, we are trying to develop a tool that allows you to locate the data that you want. I mean, what would be really good, and a part of that process, I was going to add, Emil, is we've tried to come up with some sort of use cases of how people might actually go in and access and use this. It would be really interesting to hear your perspective of, let's say what was the model you were trying to do? You weren't clear whether that data existed. What was the sort of journey you went through? And it would be interesting to sort of capture that from you and try and feed that into the thinking. So, do feel free to share your sort of further thoughts on that. But
I have requested access to the platform, and Michael Bourlakis is also on the call, and I did a project on food distribution in the cities, and our data set is customer locations, and we have a depot. From the depot we have to visit multiple customer destinations, and we are running a vehicle routing model to decide in which order to visit each customer, and it has its variants. So we have this data, we can make it available, but without that minimal information, nobody can use it. So what's the point we spend time to upload it there if I don't enter all those information? And the model is so that people can download it and run it on their own data sets. Because you can change the data and the model stays the same. Vehicle routing problem is quite standard, but it gets very difficult to solve as you have many more customers to visit.
I mean, interestingly, the existing taxonomy is based on the Inspire directive, which is fairly all-embracing but quite high level, and actually, to my mind, doesn't really give us enough discrimination to sort of burrow down into the exact details. We've been exploring other ones like EuroSci-VOC, which is based on the Cordis, the EU Cordis database, which is a listing of themes and topics, which in fact used AI to generate it, as I understand, from all of the science projects that have been funded by the EU over the past 5-10 years. And what I like about that is there's different levels of granularity. So I think at the highest level, there's only about 7 categories. So it'd be very easy just to tick one of those. But for someone who really wants to help somebody else find their data, you can go down through the taxonomy and be very specific about what the data is. So that's the sort of thing we're thinking about. So the application you've just laid out is completely different to other ones in DAFNI, and it would be interesting to see how the existing taxonomies support that.
In fact, I did observe that most of the data in DAFNI is sensor collected, so there isn't really human generated data so far. So maybe the School of Management Social Science element can grow in the future.
And I think that highlights the need to put in place measures now that support the different, as I said, the types and sources of data that we anticipate in the future.
Stephen, just to comment on this, that was a European project, Horizon 2020. I don't think the data that Emily was referring to were deposited on the Cordis database. I think we're discussing about that at some point, but I don't think they were. I can look into that, but in a way, I cannot see a challenge, let's say, to be part of DAFNI in a way. It can be straightforward, I guess. Just to clarify that, that's all.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Yes.
Can I, just a couple of points. So the social sciences aspect here is really important. So I'm a sit on the fence, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, whatever you want to call them, sort of person. And there's a growing recognition that the digital twins, the infrastructure modelling needs to have the social sciences and the behaviour coming into it. So that is really important. And there's work, for example, at Newcastle going on with tracking of individuals through the urban areas in real time. And we would like to do some of that at Cranfield. Just going back to the data structures, as the urban observatories are working towards common data structures, data standards and common APIs. So you would be able to query, for example, in one query, you could potentially get the data from all urban observatories on a particular variable or field. This starts to get very complicated when you look at, at Cranfield. Would you want to go in and look at wind speed data? Would you want wind speed data, or would you want all the data for the airfield, or the data for the, I don't know, the IMEC building, School of Management? It gets very complicated, and then behind the scenes you've got different sensors collecting. As my colleague Anne has recently discovered, you might have the same variable, but it's being collected in different ways. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work, but we are working very hard to develop this common data structure and API. So then we can share the data, we can feed into DAFNI, and potentially, in a few years' time, there might be a common platform on DAFNI where you can interrogate live data from a number of the observatories. But this is not straightforward stuff, and it's probably taken us 2 years through the Corona. We had a project called Corona prior to all of the Corona hell, looking at how you do this, and we've just put in a bid for an EPSRC program grant. This is long-term stuff. But if you want, I can provide details of the GitHub site that provides details of the kind of data structures and standards we're working on. But I think there's a conversation to be had. Just going back to the social sciences, this is why we see Cranfield as really exciting. We're a small microcosm of a city environment, whereas all these other observatories are a big complex city, so we can start to unpick some of these behaviours in a nice controlled way. So yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, so there was one last question from Michael, but I think, Michael, have you had it answered by Stephen in the chat? Are you okay? Is there anything else you want to ask around BIM and...
No, I think Stephen has been kind enough to answer it when he was addressing some of the issues. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've run out of questions on chat and we're nearly at the end of the event. Has anyone wanting to raise one last question quickly before we hand over to Simon to give us the next steps? I think, Simon.
Okay, anybody got any questions, or are we all questions?
Very interesting conversation.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for joining the call. So I realise at the moment everyone's really snowed under and dealing with daily curveballs. So to take a couple of hours out, thank you ever so much. I hope you found it useful. And as you've seen, DAFNI is still under development, and they're developing the case for long-term funding. Steve is on the DAFNI executive. I have this champion role. So part of my task now is to talk to some of you to develop maybe some ideas for projects and for further collaboration. So if you're interested in that, there's certainly something around the social sciences and the School of Management. And there's certainly something around Andrew's aspect of some of the data and the technology, because that's something we're hitting at the moment. Another area is the aspect around security and the kind of CDS angle, and that fits in very nicely with a project that I've got with Simon Harwood, and it's funded by the Connected Places Catapult. So that's very timely. And then also something that we've been talking about, and I know Brian's got an interest in, is how we support people like Niall, who are PhDs or early postdocs, who need a bit of compute help, so who aren't your traditional computer scientists. So I think that there's some topics for conversation. I will be in touch probably next week or tomorrow with one or two of you to arrange conversations. Yeah, thank you ever so much for joining in is the main thing. We weren't sure what level of engagement we'd get, but there's some seeds of potential ideas here, I think. Brian, any thoughts from you?
No, thank you. Just again, thank you very much for that. I think that was a really interesting morning. I think there's some really fantastic things we could do. I mean, I working with the Cranfield Urban Observatory, I think we're very keen on doing that, and I think all those issues around the more security sensitive applications that Cranfield is particularly engaged with, I think that's a serious discussion I think we'd like to have. So yes, I think it's been a really great morning.
Maybe just another quick comment, sort of in closing from me, is I think the timing is right here. I started off mentioning the zeitgeist was right. We have the UKRI Statement of Opportunity on AI that's just been published. There's a lot of very interesting research programs bubbling up, which draw on this sort of mix of digital environment and environmental applications and the built environment, looking for this sort of nexus really of AI, data-driven decision making, and DAFNI is right there in the centre as a resource that we can factor into bids and so on. So I think the moment is right to do this. So although the fact that actually DAFNI is not finished is a good thing, because it gives us a chance to try and help shape it. So I think the future is bright, I would say.